Today we'll be looking at the core of the Grey Knight army, the standard battle brothers themselves, the Grey Knight Strike Squad. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel, where we're always trying to get the best out of our miniatures on the table. Today we'll be continuing with our series on Grey Knights. We've been going datasheet by datasheet through the Codex. We looked at the Dread Knight last week, and today it's time to look at the Strike Squad. In this video we'll take a look at their datasheets, any obvious rules, buffs, synergies and combos, and obviously there are a lot as these are your core troops, and ways that I would run them on the table. In the background, the Strike Squads are the most basic formation of Grey Knight Space Marines, comprised of several battle brothers led by a Justicar. Each battle brother is armed with a Stormbolter and Nemesis force weapon, as befits them as one of the most elite fighting forces the Imperium has to offer. New initiates are often placed in the Strike Squads as soon as they've completed their training and augmentation program, and are often deployed in the vanguard of the Grey Knight's assault to secure a drop zone for their Terminator and Paladin counterparts to enter the field of fray to maximal effectiveness. As the core troops, they're some of the most flexible options in the Grey Knight's army, and can be deployed to meet a variety of threats. So let's see what they can do on the battlefield with a look at their datasheet. So a Grey Knight Strike Squad is the cheapest troops choice available to Grey Knights, and it comprises of 5 models, each of which has a 17-point price tag under normal circumstances, so the whole squad will typically be 85 points. Each model has the typical Space Marine stat line: Movement 6, Weapon Skill and Ballistic Skill 3+, Strength and Toughness 4, 1 Wound, 1 Attack, Leadership 7 and a 3-up save, and the Justicar, the squad sergeant, has the normal extra 1 attack and pip of leadership, meaning that the squad will be leadership 8. Every model is at base equipped with a Nemesis Force Sword, Stormbolter and Frag and Crack grenades, and is also equipped with Psychic grenades as well. This means that each squad has a pretty decent amount of firepower right off the bat due to all of those Stormbolter shots, potentially 20 bolter shots even out of a 5-man squad. The force weapons means that they're naturally strong anti-elite infantry hunters. They've particularly got a lot stronger now Space Marines have gained Shock Assault, giving them at least 2 force weapon attacks on the charge. They can swap out their force weapons for the various other Nemesis weapons, namely the Warding Stave, Force Halberd, Nemesis Force Falchions, and of course the mighty Nemesis Demon Hammer. Most of these won't actually cost any extra at all, besides the Falchions, which cost 1 extra point, and the Demon Hammer, which will cost you an extra 12 points. I'm personally a big fan of the Falchions, particularly on a squad with so few attacks, because the Falchions trade out 1 pip of AP on the Power Sword for an additional entire attack, which is almost always going to be strongest against most targets, at least compared with the standard force weapons. As it's only 5 points to upgrade the entire squad to have these, I would typically do this as my default pick, unless I was really just trying to keep the squad as cheap as possible. If you are upgrading anyone to have a Demon Hammer, it's worth making it the Justicar, because he has 2 attacks base, where the regular Battle Brothers only have 1, so giving one of them a Demon Hammer is pretty much a waste. The Warding Stave and the Halberd also aren't unreasonable options. In particular, the Warding Stave could be handy for dealing with high AP close combat attacks if the squad is targeted by any, and might just save a Battle Brother or 2 in a pinch. Besides this, for every 5 models in the squad, you can replace the Stormbolter and Nemesis Force weapon with one of the special weapons, either an Incinerator for an additional 6 points over the standard model, a Silencer for just 1 point extra, or a Psycannon for 4 points extra. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of the Incinerator due to its short range, meaning that you can't fire it after you drop out from Deep Strike, and having very limited targets even after that. I generally prefer either the Silencer or the Psycannon. In particular, it could be a bit more useful on a Grey Knight Strike Squad that's mainly going to be hanging back and trying to steal objectives, so at least they can contribute to the battle as much as they'd be able to, even if they're not necessarily going to be charging into melee. As with all Space Marines, and Grey Knights in particular, they have an absolute ton of special rules. They have their standard Demon Hunters and Rites of Banishment, which can allow them to amass a fair few smites. In particular, multiple small units of Strike Squads are a really good way to force through an absolute ton of mortal wounds on your opponent, particularly if you're using the new Tide of the Warp that gives you 2 damage smites against all opponents. They also have the Teleport Strike rule, meaning that you can set them up in Deep Strike Reserve and have them pop up somewhere in the midfield to hopefully down some enemies with some Stormbolter fire before hopefully attempting a charge. Having this much bolter fire pop up in the middle of your opponent's army can certainly be a big disruption, although the Strike Squads aren't really all that tough when it comes to taking a counterpunch, so if you do pop them up in this way, unless you're being very clever with positioning, cover or line of sight blocking terrain, they might just well be a one-hit wonder. The strike squad has bolter discipline, which is very relevant for those storm bolters, which means that if they are hanging back and just taking some pot shots from your own deployment zone, provided they're stationary, they will still be putting out their 20 bolter shots, even if the enemy isn't within 12-inch range. Finally, we already mentioned shock assault, and the strike squads are honestly one of the bigger beneficiaries of shock assault, as they're a full unit with only one attack each, where every single guy is equipped with decent melee weapons. So when they got this rule, it's essentially doubled their melee output in the first round of combat, which is very nice indeed. As with all Grey Knights, the strike squad can manifest and deny psychic powers, and they know smite and 1 psychic power from the sanctic discipline. Most of the powers are pretty useful for strike squads. It kind of depends on what else you've got in your army and what else is making use of the powers, but certainly Gate of Infinity is very useful mobility, and it's a reasonable one to have multiple copies of throughout your army. Hammer Hand is great on any Grey Knight melee units. Astral Aim could certainly be reasonable if you're taking a big squad with a lot of Storm Bolters, and Sanctuary and Vortex of Doom are perfectly reasonable picks as well, though I do typically prefer to save Sanctuary for something that's already got a decent invul save, such as a Dread Knight Grandmaster. Just beware when you're casting these psychic powers that if you do perils, you're in for a quite nasty backlash. You'll lose anywhere between 1 and 3 bodies, which will certainly be quite a blow to your squad, and maybe be even more devastating than if it was a perils on a character. So overall, the strike squad is a fairly fragile unit, but has a very decent amount of offensive damage output in basically every other phase, including shooting, melee and psychic powers. In general, in a pure Grey Knight's army, you're going to see a lot of these, as they're the cheapest troops, and great for filling out battalions to use our powerful stratagems. So let's take a look at all of the ways that we can buff up strike squads, and get more out of them in-game. First of all, we have the Tides of the Warp, and the strike squad can benefit from literally any of them. Reroll 1s to wound in melee is a decent buff. The Tide of Convergence to buff their psi weapons could push you to use more silencers or psi cannons, and you could certainly make a nasty mess of things if you have a full unit of 10 of these, using Psybolt ammunition in the Tide of Convergence. The Tide of Shadows is great for countering their main weakness, which is survivability. As small infantry squads, they're going to be really easy to get a cover save, so it means they should typically be -1 to hit with enemy shooting when you're in this tide, and automatically being in cover in the open is pretty helpful as well. Finally, we've already mentioned the Tide of +1 mortal wound to all your smites, and you could certainly cook up a very decent mortal wounds farm between a whole bunch of strike squads and some cheap HQ characters. Talking of character support, the strike squads can potentially benefit from quite a few. As per normal, Drago or Brother Captains will do the normal thing to help out their damage output at range. Chaplains could give them full rerolls to hit in close combat, as well as some of their other unique litany buffs, and we did already mention that multiple psychic powers from the Sanctic discipline can also help them, though naturally it will become more viable to use these if you're using a big squad of strike squads, say a full 10-man squad. From the Dominus discipline, Armoured Resilience is a great defensive buff, though you might well be better off using it on Paladins or Terminators. Ethereal Manipulation can be used to give them some full rerolls to hit, particularly after they come in from Deep Strike with Storm Bolters, and Edict Imperator could allow you to engage in some jump shoot jump style tactics, where the strike squad emerges from cover, you cast this on them, allowing them to shoot and then fade back behind cover, not exposing them to enemy fire. As always, the First to the Fray Warlord trait is very useful with Grey Knights, meaning they'll have a lot more chance of making that all-important charge out of Deep Strike, and strike squads, like most other things, can naturally benefit from this. In terms of stratagems, Honour the Chapter is always worth bearing in mind, to potentially fight again to end an enemy threat before it gets a chance to do anything the next turn. Psybolt ammunition could be really deadly on a big squad of 10 men with Storm Bolters, making them strength 5 AP -1, and therefore a lot more versatile at chewing through medium and heavy infantry, which of course can be combined with the Tide of Convergence for damage 2 and strength 6 as well. From Ritual of the Damned, we've gained access to Transhuman Physiology, a pricey but decent durability buff, which could be very important if you absolutely need your strike squad to survive for the turn. There's Dynamic Insertion for dropping just outside 3 inches of enemy units, which could be great for an OBSEC troops choice like the strike squad, as it could allow you to steal an objective out from under your enemy's nose. Steady Advance for 1 command point is a way to access Bolter Discipline despite having moved, meaning that your strike squad could move and then still double fire their Storm Bolters at 24-inch range, so it's good for keeping both mobility and decent fire support out from your strike squad. In general though, I probably wouldn't spend too many command points on the strike squad unless you're running a full big 10-man body squad, just because you aren't going to get quite as big a bang for your buck when you're using it on multiple small unit style strike squads. So how would I run strike squads on the field of battle then? I'd say in a competitive game, I typically want to run them as multiple small units, maybe just 85-point squads to literally just keep it cheap, fill out battalions, and act as good OBSEC troops that can still pack a big punch. This also has the advantage of getting a lot of smites on the board, because who doesn't like a lot of mortal wounds to throw at the enemy on top of your regular shooting and damage output? If I were to upgrade the squad to try and make them more dangerous, I'd certainly consider the falchions as my first port of call for upgrading their melee power, and I'd certainly be tempted by either a psi cannon or a silencer to give the squad a little bit more ranged punch, if I thought I could see them more sitting back on an objective scoring it all game. It's certainly viable to make a strike squad one of your damage dealing units that you stack some buffs and stratagems on though. In particular, they could be a very cheap way of unleashing that side bolt ammunition stratagem and stacking it with a Tide of Convergence, so you've got a whole load of shots that are strength 6, AP -1 and damage 2, which frankly is going to mess up basically anything. I'd probably want to deploy them from deep strike if I was going to do this though, as if you start them on the board, they're quite likely to get shot up, meaning that the stratagem won't be quite as effective if you've already had casualties in the unit. Typically, I'd say the strike squads can be deployed quite differently depending on the opponent that you're facing. If Stormbolter fire is going to be very important, say if you're facing a horde, you could think about deep striking them all, so you know that each time one comes in, you get a decent amount of Stormbolter fire, and put a threatening squad in the midfield to get in the way of the enemy. If maybe some of your heavy hitter units are going to be the main focus of the game, trying to get through to some Imperial Knights or Stompy Space Marines, it might well be better to allow the strike squads to secure backfield objectives, and be a little bit more conservative with their play, while you let the big, scary characters and dread knights go forward to make a mess of the enemy army. With a decent amount of strike squads, you could certainly switch strategy to being a big mortal wound generation death ball. If blitzing your opponent with mortal wounds is going to be the main way to go, you could cluster your strike squads up around a brother captain and unleash the 24-inch range damage 2 smites to start to chew through the enemy's front ranks with ease. Certainly, if you have the option of melee with your strike squads, then it's worth thinking about. I would bear in mind that they are really quite fragile to any sort of concentrated firepower or fightbacks in melee, at least point for point, being no tougher to take out than tactical marines, yet costing a fair bit more. They're always going to have an element of glass hammer about them, so it's important that you don't sacrifice them before they actually have to be, and sometimes they're just not going to do enough damage in melee before going down to an obviously superior threat. So it might just be worth letting them sit on objectives for an extra turn, and at least your opponent has to deal with them in their turn, rather than getting to kill them in yours because you charged them in. In terms of comparisons, their main competition is against the Grey Knight Terminator squads, for being your primary troops choice. Now Terminators have their own positives and negatives as well. You'll get less Stormbolter fire out of them, but potentially more long range, arguably better durability on the Terminators, though again they are a bit more susceptible to damage 2 weapons than the strike squads are. But the main thing for filling out detachment slots is that the Terminator squads cost significantly more for a minimum sized unit. So in general, I would probably prefer the strike squads over the Terminators as a general rule of thumb for filling out battalions, and then you can save some more points for buying more threatening elite type units such as Paladins, which in my opinion really are just Terminators, but with a massive upgrade. So I do like strike squads. They're very versatile, pretty threatening, and a reasonably cheap way to get a lot of command points, Stormbolter shots, and smites on the board, and will certainly do you wonders if you can find a good way to keep them alive to enemy return fire. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. I'd certainly be interested to hear anyone's opinion of how their strike squads have been performing since Ritual of the Damned and the Grey Knights got their Tides of the Warp. We'll be continuing our look at Grey Knights next week with a review of the Grandmaster Dread Knight and its pros and cons versus the regular Dread Knight, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that. If you're thinking of buying any Warhammer in the near future and you live in the UK, then I do have an Element Games affiliate link in the video description below. If you click on that before buying any Warhammer there, then a small amount of money goes to support Auspex Tactics, and it doesn't cost you any more. They have pretty decent discounts, and they've been very reliable with deliveries for me in the past, so if you are ordering in some Warhammer sometime soon, please consider it as a way to support the channel. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.